Can extend it if you want me to.
No, that's fine.
All right. We're gonna start something new for the summer here. Let's see how it goes. This is all visual. I don't have any notes. It's not notes. So we'll see. We want to talk about, boy, the world is changing so fast. I just, when you think the world couldn't change faster, I mean, when you think of 1900, pre-airplane, airplane was 1903. Automobile was somewhere around there. When you think of 1900 to 1950, a lot of change. And then 1950 to, 1990, a lot of change. Now you think of 1990 to 2010, a lot of change. And now you think, even post-COVID, even since March of 2023 or 2020, it's just remarkable the pace of change. And you wonder what's going on and how to explain, and the effect that it has on people's psyche, on the national psyche. I'm specifically interested in the Western world and the United States. But, and if you were born in March of 2020, you're now 5 years old. So you've never known anything. Your life will never know anything other than post-COVID and the world that was created out of that. And it is substantial. I said at the time, after that plus the George Floyd riots, that we were at the end of one thing and the start of another, but I'm not sure what we're at the end of or what we're at the start of.
Mhm.
And it's beginning to crystallize a little bit after 5 years. So we want to find out, why is the world the way that it is? Why are we, and I'll give you some examples of this. Let's deal first in, since 1950, the 1950s launched a new era in the world, but in American culture, the post-World War II era. And it's been an age of unprecedented prosperity and ease. And, medical care, you name it. And yet you have things like this: 10 leading causes of death among teenagers. This is 2021 and 22. 2022 is gray. Let's go with that one. So look at number 3 there. Third leading cause of death. Can you read that? Can you see that?
Intentional harm.
Yeah. Look at that. What on earth is going on?
So where's drug overdoses in that?
That'd probably be unintentional injuries, which is more psychosis, which is more, symptomatic stuff. It's not unintentional injury, somebody getting in a car accident. A drug overdose is different from a car accident.
Well, yeah, because I've looked up the stats on drug overdoses, trying to find them, and they hide them amongst other things.
I think it's unintentional injuries. Anyway, there's COVID way down there. 1.3%, 2022. So an awful lot of stuff about the frantic need to protect children from COVID. Not seeing a lot of stuff about the frantic need to protect children from killing themselves.
And in our modern day, social media has had a lot to do with the increase in teenage suicide.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. That's the whole summer. Yeah, we'll get into all that. But
So was that number less 10 years
we're
earlier?
gonna look at that in a minute. There's the flu, not even measurable. Now all the stuff, oh, you got to get your kids, you got to get everybody vaccinated. Okay, you'll save a couple lives if you do that. Not measurable in 2020 or 21. There's a reason for that too. Those numbers disappeared into the COVID number, right? Why are there no deaths measurable deaths due to the flu, influenza, or pneumonia in 2020 and 21? Where did they go? And the answer is they went to COVID. So that number up there in COVID is misleading. They got wrapped in.
But also people were not going out, so they weren't exposed to.
That wouldn't explain none.
So, yeah.
That wouldn't explain none.
So you said this age is 15 to 19?
Yeah. So, anyway, you know, lots of talk about childhood cancers. There it is, 5% 2022. But intentional self-harm, 17%. And if you want to see the graph, you don't even need to see the numbers. You can just tell. That's from 1950 to 2022. That's the graph of suicide rates.
Those higher males, huh?
Yes, much higher, dramatically higher, an order of magnitude higher. What happened in 19, we'll get to that in a second. So you can see it, that's since 1950. Since the age of prosperity and ease and retirement and medical care, you know, all these things, all that started. And it, what also coincides with the 1950s is the birth of popular culture. The precursor to what would eventually lead to social media and so forth. But the birth of popular culture was the 1950s. When the youth culture, popular culture equals youth culture, became a distinct separate thing from culture. If you go back to 1800 and so forth, there was just the culture. And youth participated in the culture. And they were indoctrinated into it. And now in the 1950s, you begin to see that separate. Post-World War II. And so youth culture becomes its own thing. In other words, youth has its own life that's distinct and deliberately and self-consciously separate from the culture. And it is often called counterculture. That's what it was in the 60s, and it's back again today. And that's the point of youth culture. The point is to be distinct and separate from culture, parents, and so forth. But you can see this dramatic increase in suicide rates among teenagers. Drops in the 1990s by almost half, till about 2010. What's magical about 2010? Interesting question. Maybe we'll get back to it. Peaks out again just before COVID, and then drops a little bit, and now it's on the rise again. It is interesting to me that when kids were staying home for that period of COVID right there, well, actually it's before COVID, never mind. So it begins to, it starts a drop. You start a downslope just like this right here. You start a downslope before COVID. That gets interrupted by COVID. And then it starts rising again. Fascinating.
My mind blank. I mean, did you talk about the peak in 1990 yet?
No, I don't have anything to say about it.
Okay.
I mean, these are the kinds of things that mystify people. And books get written about. I find this, I'm a popular culture guy. I've read a lot of books. I love that subject and trends, cultural trends, national trends, and so forth. But these things, it's very, very difficult unless you can key in on events that coincide with those dates. You have the you're in the middle of the first Obama term here. I don't know. I don't think the president makes that much of a difference in that regard. These are the Clinton years. So at the national level, I don't know. What are the social trends? What are the cultural trends during these?
1990, around the time of the first Gulf War, right?
It was, that's when it was, yeah. But most people, there's 15 to 19-year-olds.
Yeah.
What, you know, how are they affected? So there they are. Notice how much higher it is among males than it is among females. An order of magnitude higher. But that's been rising too since post 2000. But anyway, he says a number of, now you got to write an article, which means you have to sound like you know something. So first thing you're going to do is point out the obvious. First, regardless of year, the suicide rate is much higher for males than for females. Thank you. As if that wasn't obvious. so on and so forth. We don't care at this point. Second, the huge, almost linear increase in suicide rates for teen males between 1950 and 1990. That was pretty obvious. So he points out two obvious things. The third dramatic thing is to notice the sharp drop in male suicides between 1990 and 2002. Yeah, we saw that. And the fourth, the male rate rose steeply again starting in 2010, which we also noticed. So you're going, okay. Now he's going to have some questions. What was happening between 1950 and 1990 when it was increasing? What was happening between 1990 and 2000 when it was dropping? What was happening between 2000 and 2018 when it was rising again? These are the real questions. I don't know. Right there. So we got this article that points out all this stuff. He points out these anomalies, and basically the conclusion of the article is a shrug.
I mean, I would contend from 1950 to say 1975, it was the anti-war culture that had a lot to do with teenage suicide, probably.
15 and 19-year-olds.
Well, I don't know, 19-year-olds especially, I mean.
So you're
they were
15,
drafted.
remember, you're a 15-year-old between 1950 and 1960, and the rate is going up. This is before the Vietnam War. This is actually an unprecedented period of prosperity. The 1950s, matched only by probably the 1990s, or rise in prosperity. GDP, so on and so forth. But teen suicide,
Or anything change?
that's a good question. I don't know.
There's bigger gaps between the points on that graph. Looks like it's really, we look at, they had 1950 and then they go to 1960, so.
But it's linear. It's a linear graph. It's 10-year increments. So,
I wonder how that graph would compare to the rate of divorces from 1950.
yes,
I bet.
these things tend to correlate. Interestingly, the rate of alcoholism has dropped, but that's among adults. That's going to be among the older crowd. So you'd want what Doug is after, the things that affect teenagers between the ages of 15 and 19, which would be the home life and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Now, and also looking at the female rate of suicide, it stayed pretty steady until about 2004 there, where it started to increase.
Yes, and roughly about the same time as the males, it started going up, and then it dipped, and then it started going up again.
Yeah, but it's been a steady incline since then, maybe not as up
Yeah.
and down as the males, but it has been a steady increase, whereas it had been holding pretty steady.
I think social media has something to do with this increase in the last several years.
Could be.
I'm sure it does.
That and drugs.
Drug use is down.
Yeah, I find that hard to believe.
Yeah. We'll look at those. We'll look at all this stuff later. Yeah. Yeah, the fentanyl epidemic right now, there's all kinds of things like, we're gonna get back to, I'm just introducing, we'll get back to all this stuff later. But there's the numbers, you start out at 3.5 per 100,000. And now we're up to 16 points, factor of 5, essentially, 4.5 to 5.
Well, I guess that's in both sexes then.
Yeah.
Almost.
So that's that subject. Then there's this. This came into my feed because of the kinds of things that I click on. Here's a guy in Psychology Today. PhD in what? And his specialty is pop culture mental health. This may sound like alien talk to you, which gives you a sense of the gap between culture and popular culture at this point. Normalize identity expression with the neo-pronoun revolution. He's advocating here. We should normalize identity expression with what he calls the neo-pronoun revolution. Who knows what neo-pronouns are?
I'm guessing he, she, they, no.
No.
What?
they, them, they stuff, it's just mostly the non-binary who feel like they don't fit they, them, she, her, and they want something new to themselves, so they make up words.
That's actually a pretty accurate.
Like, they,
Okay.
so.
Yeah, it's be z's, zays, zems, or, you know,
I never.
non-conforming. Think non-conforming. Conforming is he or she. Him or her. Non-conforming is, you know, something else. Anyway, embracing, those are neopronouns. In the gender non-conforming, gender non-binary, gender fluid world, where male doesn't exist as an immutable thing, and female doesn't exist as an immutable thing, but you can cross boundaries and be fluid in this world of what he calls identity expression. Embracing neopronouns might personalize, look at the keywords, because we're going to get back to these, might personalize and revolutionize identity expression. We're on the path, we're on the search for identity expression. There's this relentless search for identity expression.
Well, basically, it's nowadays in school, you can, you can use any bathroom you want because
Exactly.
you don't know if you're a male or
Yeah.
female.
So it's, the point of me bringing it up is to highlight it as symptomatic of our times, without actually even, I mean, it's ridiculous, but I'm not trying to judge it per se. I just want, well, case in point about where we are as a culture. But look at the words. We want to normalize, implying that that's not considered normal, and we're going to be on it. We want a program to normalize this thing that people, the culture, does not believe is normal. We want to normalize that. Revolution. He wants a revolution in identity expression. He wants to personalize identity expression rather than having it be a shared thing where you conform to some norm of male, female. It becomes personalized and you choose, customizable. If he wants to make identity expression, gender expression, customizable, like what you wore today. You don't like your clothes, you go online, you go to Wear the Gap, and you get other clothes until you find the clothes that are right for you, both in size and in style. And gender expression now has entered that realm. It's the infinite customizability of life, the potentially infinite customizability of life and personal identity. That's now, gender has now entered that realm for these people. So there they are again, revolutionize. We want to personalize and revolutionize identity expression. So now in order to do that, you have to be a you have to take on the mantle of authority on gender expression, on identity expression, right? Which you can only do by anointing yourself. So you become a self-anointed expert on identity expression. So you put those 3 letters after your name right there. PhD, and then if you look this guy up, what his PhD is, I guarantee you it ain't anything in a science. It ain't biology. It ain't even philosophy. So we'll get back to that too. But anyway, you walk down this a little bit. Neopronouns break free, here it is, that the sign of our times, break free of binary constraints, either ors, yes or no's, true or false, 1 or 0. Offering linguistic expression, how I refer to myself and how other people refer to me is in some sense pivotal to my sense of identity. So linguistic expression matters. With linguistic expressions as diverse, there's a magic word, as human experience. So all of these things then are malleable. Gender expression, I mean, this is all malleable. This is all changeable and fluid. You don't jump from one thing to another. It's fluid. It's a continuum. It's a gradient. Universal adoption would destigmatize. So universal adoption. He's not saying, hey, if you want to have your own pronouns, you go have your own pronouns. That's not good enough for him. Don't let the world tell you anything. You go have your own pronouns. He's not doing that. He says the whole world must adapt and change. That's the revolution. The whole world, universal adoption, nothing less than universal adoption. It takes universal adoption. It takes the whole world adopting it in order for it pronoun expression to be destigmatized.
Good luck with that.
Still not even. It's sacred and this is kind of filtered for so many people.
Yeah. This is what we're going to talk about at the end. I'm just introducing it now. But yeah, that's exactly right. Neopronouns can enhance cognitive flexibility. Define, please. Define, please. And rewire social interactions toward greater inclusivity. And you can hear the buzzwords kicking in one after another. And then we'll probably look at this again later. But and then we'll get to Dana's down here. He has Dana's right here. There's your neopronouns. Z, them, zer, zers, or am. Sure, make up. Why stop at 3? Make up,
I-
Yes.
That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
You know, I see that.
Anyway, where does this come from? How did this happen? You say this nonsense to people. There, I just judged it. You say this interesting proposal. Let's call it an interesting proposal. An interesting and provocative proposal to somebody in 1908. Well, you wouldn't. You have to have a popular culture where you can get away with this to even say it. He's not talking to, he's trying to make this the culture. That's what he's a self-anointed expert in popular culture, mental health. But he wants it to make, this is my read of it, he wants to make it he wants to have it take the leap into the culture. That's the universalizing. So that everybody adopts it, everybody bows to it. It's not going well recently. The program is not going well in the last 6 months or so. Things have radically changed in regard to this sort of thing. This was written this is brand new. This just came out, May 28, 2025. So he's a bit behind the times. In fact, it almost sounds a little bit passé. By coincidence, or maybe not by coincidence, today is the first day of what? Pride Month. Universal adoption, right? It's not June, it's Pride Month.
No, it's June.
Keeping up with the pop culture zeitgeist, the situation in the pop culture. That's not going well either. None of these things are going well at this point. We'll talk about that too. But how did this happen? Because even people have said this before. You wouldn't have gotten away with this 10 years ago. You would not have gotten away with this 10. You certainly wouldn't have gotten away with it 20 years ago. 30, 40 years ago, you would have sounded like you needed to be in a mental health center or something. I don't know. So anyway, we'll hold that in our back pocket. I'm just gonna Nafis at Alam. Let's see what he's got here. Oh, we can close this. Nafis.
But it just shows that sin is becoming a norm in our culture.
Walden University. I agree with that. He has a PhD from Yeshiva University and an MST has been, it's published and presented on self-determination in sport social work.
We're all here.
Yeah.
He's changed.
Let's see I'm interested in his training. He's a social work professor specializing in nonprofit, blah, blah.
Did you take him up there?
He got a PhD, there it is. He got a PhD in social work in 2019. His PhD dissertation was in Nothing About Us Without Us. It's creative. Exploring the attitudes towards service, user inclusion, and social work education in the United States. Okay,
Well, I tell you what, I know that when you go write a PhD thesis, you have to do it on something nobody has ever done before, and we certainly did.
he succeeded, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's by way of intro. The point is, we're gonna walk through this. And I'm gonna have this for you, it's still in flux. I'm still working on it as of this morning. So I'm probably gonna make more changes, but we're gonna walk through this and try to figure out how on earth did we go from here in Western culture on the left of the chart with Jesus being at the center of the culture to this mess over here all the way to the right and what we see around us today. In other words, if you ask the question, what is the purpose for which the universe exists? We have a very clear answer. This is my own personal. I was going to pull one verse out to define and to state categorically the purpose of the universe. It's Daniel chapter 7. Behold, with the clouds of heaven, there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. To him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. And I can't think of a better purpose statement for the universe. That's the destination for which the universe is inevitably, that is the end to which the universe is inevitably pointed. And from his perspective, it's not penciled in, it's written, it's carved in stone. He knows the date and hour. That leads to what I call that settled sense of purpose. As a Christian, that settles the thing. That creates a narrative for us. We're going to talk a lot about narrative and how narrative changes. Narrative being the stories we tell ourselves and the story that we inherit from the culture about our world and our place in it. So we have a sense of through the Bible. Let's talk locally. We have a sense of we have a story. We've been brought into a story, and it's the story of Israel, having been made children of Abraham, just like the Jews. We have now been brought into that story. So if you ask, there was no question about it for Jews in Jesus' day. There was no struggling for what on earth is the meaning of life. They understood the meaning of life. The problem was the reality on the ground wasn't consistent with it because the Romans were in charge and they didn't have a Davidic king on the throne. Jesus arrives. Oh my goodness, the story of Israel. Now this potential Messiah, is God on the move? Is God all that story comes into play for the way that they think. So they told a story about their own lives, which fits into the larger story of their nation of Israel. That's how they understood themselves. And so that's always been true. And the Christian world inherited that story. And so our narrative is a religious narrative. And we're going to get back to that and how that evolving narrative of the culture, because that frankly is what it's all about. Jesus quotes it, the ultimate purpose. In Mark 14, you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. That's his statement too, about the ultimate destiny of the universe, my kingship, the return of the king. That's our story, and we're sticking to it. And that leads to that magic word that's used in Hebrews chapter 11. It gets undersold because this verse tends to go in one direction. Faith is the assurance. This seems to be a statement about faith. I assure you it's more than that. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not yet seen, the conviction that they will be seen, right? Consistent with our story and the return of the king. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for. the sense, the settled sense of purpose in the universe leads to, and is the only sure foundation for hope. When people out in the world talk about hope, what they're really usually saying is, I hope it works out.
Yeah.
I hope chance falls my way on this one. I mean, I'm gonna try to make the odds go in my direction, but at the end of the day, I'm just hoping it works out. It's, I hope I get that job. I think I will. But there's no settled sense of it.
Chance.
Our sense of hope is fundamentally different. Did I interrupt you, Phil?
No, I just said wishful thinking, really how we think of hope.
That's how the world, that's the world's, yeah. Let's see. So there it is. You will see, says Jesus categorically in yellow, the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power, coming with the clouds of heaven. There's our settled sense of purpose and hope. The return of the King. Now there's the postmodern, we'll get back to these words. There's the world as we have it today. And so I'm looking around in the popular culture, and I got a million of these, and I picked one. I picked the nearest one at hand. From movies and TV are often reflections of what's going on in the culture and what the culture believes and so forth. They both create and express what's going on in the culture. It's a feedback loop. And so, how many have seen Terminator 2? Judgment Day? Terminator 2, how many saw Terminator 1? Terminator with Arnold Schwarzenegger. Are you really?
I know that I'll be back, but that's one.
Yeah, that wasn't in, well, that was Terminator 1. Yeah. But that doesn't matter. Stop trying to get me off. Anyway, Terminator, it gives you a sense of what is considered culturally, what is considered, what is the, what's the right word? Mindset of the popular culture. Because you're going to have a script that's going to reflect that so people can connect with it. So what did they choose on this subject? The future is not set. She carves it in the picnic table before she disappears, Linda Hamilton. You don't remember. The future is not set. There is no fate but what we make for ourselves. And then that becomes kind of the guiding principle here in T2. Ironically, the movie is subtitled Judgment Day because it turns out that Judgment Day is unavoidable. We find that out in the third episode in, what was it called? I forget what it was called. But I may have mixed my movies up here. But they find out that it is set. There's nothing they can do to prevent this. Can somebody get my movies right? The one this is what happens.
Watch that genre stuff, so I.
This is what happens when you work from memory.
Right.
That's the third one? Yeah, in the third one, you find out that she was wrong. I guess they thought about it and they thought, well, we can't really have a franchise if this statement is true. So we're gonna erase it from the picnic table. But anyway, there's the not the settled sense of purpose in the universe, but the pointless end of all things. So do the best you can, because nobody's watching out for you. Where else did I go here? Which leads us to the scourge of our time, which I'm going to call naturalism's offspring. We'll talk about naturalism, nihilism. And what I call that sinking feeling that everybody in here, particularly people who, yeah, probably everybody in here, but you particularly probably had it when you were a kid, a sense of low-grade desperation about life, a franticness. The universe exists for no purpose, has no end in mind, and is destined for extinction. If you do not believe that there's a God, there's no way around that statement.
Was it the sixties when nihilism really came out strong?
No, it'd be earlier than that.
Or
The post-World War II has unleashed nihilism on our world, the post-World War II era.
Because of the nuclear age?
We'll get, yeah, that, we're gonna get into all that, yeah. How did this, this is all, uneducated guess, but, this is the sort of stuff people have written infinite numbers of PhD dissertations on. Anyway, human life is not even an afterthought. It is meaningless, insignificant, and has no intrinsic value. So buck up and make the best of it. Good luck. Nihilism. And what?
I'm just thinking about that, you would, lend support to abortion rights.
Absolutely. That's the line from the anti-abortion advocate was speaking in front of a college crowd, hostile audience, and she was being challenged by a student. And she says, I could find it on YouTube, maybe I should. She says so naturally she's gonna bring up the fetus and what it is. And so that's what she says, what is it? And the student says, it's a really interesting moment. The student says, so at this point, the student, you have this, what's the right, bravado. You think you got it. And you got the microphone and there's a big crowd and everybody's listening and you're kind of basking in it because you're going to take on the crazy anti-abortion woman, right? None of these people who get up on these right wingers that get up on these stages are crazy. And every one of them has been down this road 1,000 times and they're really, really good at it. You're not going to ask a question. You're not going to make a comment that they haven't already heard 100 times and thought through. So she's standing there and she challenges the person on the stage and the person on the stage says, well, what is it then? And it's as if she knew what the student was going to say. The student says, it's a clump of cells. And with no hesitation, the woman on the stage says, I'm a clump of cells. And the student had no thought, had no thought, and she couldn't think of anything to say. And so I remember you would see it in the video. She kind of turned around towards the audience as if somebody was going to help her out of this situation she created. And there's this tentative moment of insecurity and nobody in the audience was getting up. He said, I know where I'm staying right where I am. And she just had no response. So there it was. There's the nihilist answer to the question, what is a human life? On both sides. The problem was the student didn't understand that if God does not exist, then we're all just a clump of cells. It's a continuum from conception to death. Clumps of cells. Some of them survive and some of them don't, just like in the animal kingdom. So there is no value assessment when a person dies, any more than there is with roadkill. When you see a raccoon on the side of the road or something. Oh, look at the raccoon on the side of the road. And that's human life from the vantage point of the ultimate meaning of things. So that's an introduction to a very, very one-sided, strong statement about nihilism and its pervasive influence. It's like a mental, I don't know what it is, like a disorder that infects everyone to some extent or another.
Well, I would say that nihilism itself would be a leading cause towards the increase in suicide. If there's no purpose in life, then why live?
But when I closed the did I close it? Why did I do that? That's it.
Here's a meme.
Here it
It's
is.
literally just a clump of cells, and someone responds, so was George Floyd. Okay.
Yeah, she's probably not, she heard that from somebody. The student heard clump of cells from somebody, that's why she said it. She didn't think of that, and so it would be a common thing that the anti-abortion advocate would have been down, she'd been down that road many times. But, anyway, notice, yeah, nihilism goes on the rise. Post-World War II, for all kinds of reasons, and look what else goes on the rise. So, yeah, you're probably onto something. Maybe a little more than this guy, whose response is, I don't know. Really? I don't have a degree in psychology, but I consider I can go toe to toe with some people on this question. In Psychology Today. This is Psychology Today. I mean, it's a psychology magazine. So, you know,
Well, he does have an opinion there about the suicide rate in 2020.
yeah, that they were at home.
Yeah.
Be interesting to know if the divorce rate went up during COVID. Okay. All right, so how on earth did we get from that settled purpose of the return of the king, believed in culture-wide in Western civilization, to this over here on the far right? That's the question that we're dealing with for a while, that we're going to deal with for however long it takes to talk through this. So we'll talk a little bit. There's an interesting interplay between what we call, what we can think of as secular history in Western civilization, between secular history, just like Israel, between secular history and church history or religious history. They sort of fuse together in Western civilization at a certain point, which we'll talk about. But that's why you see both church elements in this timeline and secular elements. People in below the line in green, those are my take on who are the most, if I had to pull out, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 10 of the 10 most important names in the history of Western civilization to determine how we got here. I'd probably that list of people. You'll notice there's no names after Darwin. What you have after Darwin are movements without leaders. You have writers, and I know them and I've read them, but you don't have anybody anywhere that stands out. You have great scientists like Einstein, but you don't have, Francis, Watson and Crick. Watson and Crick? Yes, Watson and Crick, the co-discoverers of the DNA helix. You have names like that made discoveries, but they didn't really opine on popular culture, on culture. I guess Einstein opined on God. God does not play dice and so forth. But we'll talk about how this all, how I think this unfolded. My take on how this unfolded. It's probably my favorite subject of the last 30 years. I was on staff with Campus Crusade for 7 years, and this is the 90s. Hot issue. So I did a lot of talking and a lot of reading and studying on these kinds of issues. Post-modernity, what is often called post-modernity, which we're beyond now. If you've heard the expression postmodern, we're at least one and maybe 2 stages beyond post-modernity at this point. So we'll talk about that. But anyway, we're going to start over here and we're going to proceed through here, talk about these events and why they mattered as we try to understand this crazy world which exists today and swirls around us. So there we are. Anybody want to say anything or ask any questions before?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. What I've seen, just in my life, that back when I was homeschooling, there was a lot of talk about how the public schools began. And it began with a man whose whole idea was to remove God from our children, because the schools have them for a lot of hours at a time. And that's why public schools, more like we know now, began. I won't say maybe way back when, but when it all became more centralized and everything, it began with the idea of removing God, the idea of God from our children. Well, not only in the lower grades, but especially in the colleges. And it is very difficult when we were trying to find a college for my daughter to go to. She wanted one that actually believed the Bible. Well, we sent questions to many at so-called Christian colleges. Do you believe in the flood? Do you believe in the virgin birth? And we got responses back from a lot of them. Why does that matter? Yeah, I'm not kidding. We even had one college where the pastor of the college, I can't remember what his actual title was, so I'm calling him pastor, chaplain, whatever he was called, actually called my daughter and argued with her over the flood.
Your statement that somebody responded, what does it matter? We're gonna talk about why they would, what is motivating.
Well, the thing is, see,
Right.
they've all been indoctrinated by their colleges.
So
And
the,
then their colleges indoctrinate more. And then also we have all the issue of funding. And I really think a majority of all the deception we're seeing these days goes back to money, funding. If you buck the system, you get no funding. You can't keep your doors open. So you go along with the system, and the system just gets worse and worse and worse.
so education is public education in general is is a phenomenon of the Enlightenment.
Mhm.
And the tremendously strong forces that were unleashed during the Enlightenment. And
Yeah.
I'm gonna use words like secularizing, which is
Mhm.
exactly what Kay is referring to here. So this guy who wrote that back, why does it matter, is probably thinking in terms of a dichotomy. We're not talking about God here. What we're talking about is education. As if there's this, as if they're two separate things. And that never happened before the Enlightenment. But post-Enlightenment, the very idea of public education was to create a secular educational system.
Mhm.
And so without, it doesn't even have to be malicious. We don't want God, we just want to do education. And you know, education doesn't involve God. We want to do math and science. We want to create cogs to take their place in the infrastructure of the economy and be able to get a job. And you don't, what does that have to do with God? We just want to do that, as if these things can be separated out.
Well,
And
and the
that
trouble is,
idea of the private versus the public sector, you've heard that expression, the private sector and the public sector. That is a post-Enlightenment dichotomy.
the biggest problem we've had, though, is not just the removing of God, but because people have an innate need for something more than themselves. We've also brought in things like transcendental meditation, finding your spirit guide, and all
Yeah,
these kind of things into the education system. So when we removed God, we brought in the ungods.
Yeah, we'll get
forced
into
them
that.
onto our-
We'll talk a lot about that kind of thing when we get to the Enlightenment, which is about that's the third little, well, the fourth little section over there. There's so much. You'll notice how busy it gets. Once you get past 1500, the third dotted line, vertical dotted line, gets really busy. And I was trying to figure out, I can either make this bigger or I can just keep it as simple as I can. So I chose what I thought were the four most significant events or phenomena or movements, if you will, during that period, which is the third, which is the Reformation, the 30 Years' War, the Enlightenment, and World War II, all of which lead logically, they're logically connected. They're connected, they're causally connected. Those four things. So World War One. Yes. We'll talk about why that is.
And it's interesting how one thing leads to another. For instance, your pre-modern medieval papal supremacy. Well, part of the problems are because of that. They didn't want people to be educated. It seems that at least that's the attitude I've always got when I looked at that era. But they had people pushing towards education, and that became part of the Enlightenment and stuff.
Yeah, they would certainly disagree with the Enlightenment belief that they didn't want people to be educated.
And pre-enlightenment, where there was this, move towards going back to, original transcripts or whatever.
That's
where
the Renaissance.
Erasmus comes into the picture with the.
That's the Renaissance
Yeah, the Renaissance.
in the middle there. Yeah.
And, but then you get to the 1800s. There's another name that I would put up there along with Marx and Darwin, all about the same time. That would be John Dewey, which I think she kind of referred to as the father of modern education.
Right. I
Okay,
couldn't remember his name. Thank you.
so let's, okay, I have 4 minutes left, but let's talk about Jesus first. Just to set the timeline here. This is, we're talking about 2,000 years of history at this point, almost exactly 2,000 years. If we're in 2025, if you assume that Jesus was born just before Christ. In, about 4 BC or something like that. That is going to be probably the most important event, birth in the history of Western. That's not true. Since there's been no more important birth since his birth in the history of Western civilization. Because I thought about putting people before him, but I have ran out of room. But you'd have to talk about the establishment of the Roman Empire under Augustus, and then you got Caesar who ended the Roman Republic, and then you go back to the Greeks, and you've got Alexander, and then you have Plato and Aristotle, and Socrates and so forth. It just depends on how you want to do this. But in the last 2,000 years, his birth is just, to me, pales all others. And so the New Testament period is the first 95 or so years of that first century. If you assume that the Gospel of John and Revelation and all the writings of John were written in the 90s, that closes the New Testament period. And so now you're in a period of copying manuscripts. And so these manuscripts are now they're going to make their way around. You have the original writings written between, let's say 51 or 52 AD to 90 something AD, something like that, over a 40-year period or something like that. Now they all pass off the scene, and these letters and these books, epistles and works by Luke and so forth, are making their way around the empire on papyrus scrolls, uncontrolled. And so there's no professional scribes at this point. This stuff is just uncontrolled. The churches the churches copy, individuals copy, and it moves along and so on and so forth. And certain books are recognized as what we think of as inspired, and others aren't. But from what we know, all of the letters that we have of Paul made it into the canon of Scripture, which is not going to come around until the end of the 4th century or so, because of another momentous event. But anyway, these books are these writings, these 27 writings of the New Testament are making their way around independently. There's no Bible, there's no New Testament. They're just making their way around. And by the end of the 1st century, you're going to see the four Gospels will be joined together, and they will travel together collectively. That's why they're called the Gospel of, the Gospel of, the Gospel of, and the Gospel of. Those are emendations to to those books because they travel together now, and so you need to distinguish them. Acts is now separated from Luke and travels separately. That's why it's probably why it's the 5th book in the New Testament and not immediately after Luke, even though it's one story. It's 2 volumes of the same story. And then the letters of Paul would travel together eventually, and so you have Paul to the Romans, to the Galatians, and so on and so forth. And so that's going to happen for the first few centuries. And during that period, as far as church control, there is no central control over the churches. We have a period, what is known as the Federation of Bishops, where the bishops of the the churches in the various cities, Antioch, Ephesus, Corinth, just travel around, Thessalonica, Philippi, wherever there are churches, they all have their elder, their bishop, and those bishops have power. Those people have power, and some of them are very famous, like Clement of Alexandria. There's also a Clement of Rome, and the church tradition has Peter being the first bishop of Rome. I don't know how that could be. He may have been a bishop in Rome, but I don't know how he could be the first bishop in Rome. But anyway,
Lie. Through lies.
well, I mean, I don't have a strong opinion. I mean, he could have
Yeah.
been. I mean, maybe they never really. It's not reported. There's just simply the church in Rome. No single name. There is a Clement of Rome, but Peter would have been cast off the scene by then. We just don't know. We don't know whether that's sort of how that. We don't have the detail on that sort of thing. But anyway,
No, it's because someone said, oh, if we claim this, we'll have more power. Because people are corrupt. That's just the way it is. If there's a corrupt way to do something, somebody's going to figure it out. I know
Yeah,
I sound
probably right.
rather pessimistic, but the Bible says men love darkness rather than the light. And we see that
Oh, I guess.
throughout all of the written history of the Lord's. It starts out, first thing we do, we get corrupt, and then it just continues. And so I think a lot of what and I'm just going to name it, the Catholic Church has done in so many ways. There have been corrupt leaders who have said the way to get power, the way to get money, the way to control, and they go after it in whatever way that they can. And I think the claim that Peter is, the foundation for the Catholic Church is just one of those power grabs. I truly do. I can't prove it, but I really do believe that's the case.
Well, we'll pick up there next time. Close out the Federation of Bishops and then get into the really interesting medieval period, pre-modern era, from our perspective, pre-modern. So thanks for joining, everybody. Appreciate it.
Everybody have a great Sunday.
Yep, you too.
Bye.
Bye.